export animals every everything. You know, honestly, when I get up and talk, we're going to talk about how Part C is not the but if you want me to take all the heat for that, yeah. Sounds good. Happened it.
And so we're back on the record in the cases of State versus Carolyn Lattin, State versus Debbie Lattin, back on December. This case was tried to a jury, and the jury returned verdicts of guilty on both counts, and today we're here for sentencing. And so before we start with sentencing, I'm going to take a minute, and I'm required, and I'm going to advise both Lattins of their rights on appeal. Following that, I'll hear the state's recommendation on sentencing, and then I'll hear from Mr. Coburn, and if they wish, I'll hear from Ms. Debbie Lattin as well as Ms. Carolyn Lattin. And again, another thing I want to put on is I saw, it was given to me this morning, a request for restitution. Mr. Coburn, did you get a copy of that?
I received a copy of that today, Your Honor.
And so I'm going to advise both of you of your rights on appeal. I'm just going to read these rights once, but they will apply to you both. You've been found guilty following a trial, and as a result of that, you have a right to appeal your convictions on these cases. You have the right to a lawyer on appeal. If you can't afford an attorney, one can be provided at no cost to you. In order to file this appeal, or in order to appeal, you must file a notice of appeal with the Superior Court here in Thurston County, and within 30 days of the entry of the final decision, which will be today. So you need to file that within 30 days of today. You must also immediately serve a copy of the notice of appeal on all other parties. In this case, there's just one other party, the state. You'll need to serve them. You need to pay for the cost of preparing the record within 10 days after the clerk notifies you that the record is ready to transmit. And if you are indigent, if you can't afford that, the court can excuse you from paying, but you'll need to apply for that and see if you qualify. If you fail to file and serve a notice of appeal within 30 days of today's date, you've forever given up your right to appeal. And upon request of the clerk, we could provide you with the paperwork or a standard form of notice of appeal. Any other form of post-conviction relief, which there are certain things, other than a direct appeal, such as a personal restraint petition, or motion to vacate, motion to withdraw, guilty plea, which doesn't apply in this case, motion for a new trial, and a motion to arrest judgment must be filed within, there are certain time limits involved in that, usually a year. And if you don't comply with those time limits for either appeal or other collateral relief, those remedies are lost. And so, having said that, Mr. Lippert, who's going to address the court on behalf of the state? Is it going to be you, Mr. Lippert?
I'll be on.
I'll hear from you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, we filed with the court before I begin here, materials outlining, itemizing all of the costs that are associated with our request for restitution. I just want to confirm that the court had that. That was also provided to Mr. Cover.
I think that's this right.
Yes, it's probably 50 pages, or maybe not that many, of bills and itemized costs associated with which you had that.
Okay.
I probably will not be referring to that specifically. With respect to the sentence, Your Honor, since June 14th, 2017, when the Thurston County Sheriff's Office began its investigation of animal cruelty, the incident investigation of animal cruelty at the Lattins cider mill and Country Farm, that ultimately led to the conviction of both Carolyn and Debbie Lattin for second-degree animal cruelty. The sole concern for the county, of the county sheriff's office and the county prosecutor, has been the welfare and the treatment afforded the goats and other animals owned by the Lattins. From the outset of the investigation, the Lattins refused to work with or consider suggestions from the sheriff's office animal cruelty investigator so as to avoid seizure of the poorly treated goats from the farm. Similarly, the Lattins refused all efforts by the county prosecutor to avoid criminal charges for the Lattins, as we discussed on the record in court on a prior motion session. by having the Lattins enter into a diversion agreement, which would have allowed the seized animals to be returned to the Lattins so long as they provided periodic reports from a qualified veterinarian on the health and maintenance of their goat herd, and provided some restitution for reasonable expenses incurred for veterinary care and maintenance of the seized animals. The county prosecutor's office offered to the Lattins to resolve this case through diversion, remained available to the Lattins all the way through and really up until trial in this case. You yourself discussed the potential outcomes of a trial with the Lattins on the record at a prior hearing. The Lattins steadfastly refused to accept the responsibility for the proper care and health and maintenance of their animals, and that forced the county sheriff's office and the county prosecutor to exercise their authority to ensure the Lattins' animals were properly cared for. The sentence the county prosecutor's office will recommend for the Lattins following their conviction for the gross misdemeanor of animal cruelty in the second degree reflects the county prosecutor Thunheim's concern that citizens who own animals must treat them responsibly in the interest of public safety and the general welfare of our community. Considering all the factors involved, including the age of the defendants, their history of providing service to this community, their long-standing business presence in the county, and the evidence of recent economic difficulties at the farm, the prosecutor requests the following sentence for both defendants. First, 364 days of incarceration for both defendants, all suspended. Forfeiture of the 18 goats seized from the Lattins' farm. And in support of that, Your Honor, we would ask the court enter a finding that the maltreatment of the 18 goats seized was severe and likely to reoccur as is required by the statute in order to have a forfeiture in the second degree animal cruelty case. Next, Your Honor, restitution to Hooked Animal Rescue of $6,768.26 as is itemized in the materials that have been provided to the court, which I previously discussed. That restitution reimburses those who provided veterinary care, treatment, maintenance, and shelter for the goats that were seized from the Lattins from June 14th to the present. It also includes an estimate, and I will refer to the materials provided, an estimate from the veterinarian regarding the castration of two mature bucks and the castration of 4 yearling bucks, which needs to be done in order to properly maintain those animals, and that's at a cost of $1,700. The figure I quoted earlier includes that amount. The figure does not include any amount for the cost of expert witnesses from the government that was provided in court. Although that amount is also listed in the materials, it is not part of the total, Your Honor. Next, Your Honor, we would ask that you direct payment of the statutory civil penalty of $1,000 by both defendants to the county for prevention of cruelty to animals as is required by the statute. As I stated earlier, the defendants have presented some evidence of financial issues which were faced by their farm during trial. The state is therefore not asking the court to impose any part of the maximum $5,000 fine that could be imposed on both defendants in this case. No fine, Your Honor. The state will ask the court for a ruling enforcing the statutory provision prohibiting the defendants from owning, caring for, or residing with any animal similar to those involved in this case for 2 years. It is the state's position that the term similar animals includes any animal in the order known as Artiodactyla, which is a fancy way of saying two-toed ungulates. This order includes, but is not limited to, the following: goats, sheep, deer of all kinds, antelope, cattle, bison, buffalo, pigs, llamas, alpacas, and vicunas. These animals all have cloven hooves that, if kept in a domestic setting, require regular maintenance and are susceptible to hoof scald and hoof rot like the goats that had to be seized from the defendants based on the maltreatment of those animals. The state would also ask the court to bar the Lattins from owning, caring for, or residing with miniature horses or other such animals as are common to petting zoos or menageries. The state also requests the court enter as part of the defendant's terms of probation a standing order authorizing the Thurston County Sheriff's Office Animal Cruelty Team to perform unannounced quarterly inspections of the Lattins farm, including all structures and outbuildings, to ensure the defendants are complying with the statutory bar to owning, caring for, or residing with goats or similar animals for the duration of the 2-year statutory period, which is also the period of probation in this matter, Your Honor. And that is the extent of the state's request and recommendation for sentencing, Your Honor. If you have any questions.
No, thank you, Mr. Lippert. I don't have any questions at this time, although I might in a minute.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Cover, I'll hear from you.
Thank you, Your Honor. A few points first. My clients tried at length to work with the state. If the state's sole concern was the welfare of the animals, this case could have been dispensed with back in the summertime. But what the case wanted was money. Okay. Now, the state has stated that my clients refused to work with Deputy Nastansky. When Deputy Nastansky, you heard my client testify what she experienced when Deputy Nastansky arrived. You heard my client testify that she wasn't even served with the warrant until the end of the encounter, and that she never ever received an affidavit on the day of either of the encounters. Now, the state also says that my clients have refused to accept responsibility. My clients offered the state a regime of veterinary care. They offered the state a regime of reporting. But the one and only thing that led this case to trial was money. The demand that the state be compensated for animal neglect, the neglect of the dog attacks and the other events that were chronicled by Dr. Humphrey that occurred to my client's animals. Now, moving on to the statute, I want to direct the court's attention to RCW 16.52.200. And you will notice in sub 1.
Okay, hang on just a minute.
Yes, Your Honor.
Let me call that up. Say that again, please. RCW.
16.52.200. And I would direct the court's attention now to sub 1, which states that this court has, under the ambit of its authority, the power to suspend this entire sentence as set forth in RCW 3.66.067 and RCW 3.66.068. And that's what
I'm going to stop you there for just a second, because my interpretation, I have it in front of me now, is in terms of suspended and deferred, yes, you can do a deferred sentence within that statute. Suspended means suspended jail time. In terms of, I don't think I have the authority to, later on, it says, and section 4 of the same statute indicates any person convicted shall be prohibited from owning, carrying, or residing with any similar animals for a period of time as follows. And it says 2 years for first conviction. So even if I suspend the sentence, which is the state's asking for, suspending all jail time, the conviction is entered. A conviction would still be entered. It's a consequence of that conviction that those similar animals can't be cared for at the Lattins farm. There's nothing I can do about that. I don't think. But go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor.
You can continue.
Thank you for that record, Your Honor. So in short, my clients would ask the court to suspend all relief that is not specifically mandated by RCW 16.52, and we say that applies to the 2-year suspension of the animals. That applies to all the other relief that the state has asked for. My clients don't necessarily have a problem with, going to the vet, as they have always gone to the vet, because the Lattins have always loved their goats. And with that, we rest, Your Honor.
ask you specifically, state's requesting an order forfeiting the goats that were seized back in June. Do you have a particular response to that?
Yes, Your Honor.
Because again, I will just tell you, as a result of the conviction, they can't own or, the statute's real clear on that. They can't own or have any control of the goats for the next 2 years.
Your Honor, the state asked for a finding of fact that the damage to the goats was severe and is likely to occur. There's nothing in the evidence that indicates that a recurrence of the hoof rot is likely to occur. In fact, we have veterinary reports saying that the hoof rot has went away. So we would ask that the court not make that finding of fact or that conclusion of law. We would ask that the court suspend all jail time. We would ask that the court not forfeit the goats. We would ask that all restitution be reserved. We would ask that payment of a $1,000 fine to the Thurston County Animal Cruelty Fund be reserved, if not suspended. And we thank the state for not asking for the $5,000 fine, because we would be asking for that to be reserved as well.
So Ms. Debbie Lattin, I'll hear from you first. If you wish to address, you have the right to address the court at sentencing. You don't have to if you don't want to. Is there anything you'd like to say at this time?
I've had to sit here in this courtroom and listen to lies from the prosecutor, from the assistant prosecutor, and especially from the deputies, and from several witnesses, not all, but several witnesses that have been that came against me. All of this stemmed from a deputy on a power trip that did not give me a chance to testify.
I'm going to stop you for a second. I want you to, I'm asking you to address the court now, and so if you want to address comments, please address them to me.
I have complied with everything the court has wanted me to do. I had no problems complying with veterinary care. I had no problems doing everything in my power to make these animals better. I had asked for people to come and help us treat goats, and it never came about because they didn't want to come and help us. I had asked for my employees who had the primary care of the goats. I did not. To do their job and treat the goats. I wasn't allowed to testify that they didn't do their job. When I found out they didn't do their job, I had fired them prior to this. This is the first time I've been able to even state this for the court's record. And I realize it's too late to do any good for anybody, and I realize that most of you don't care. But now it is on the record. And I'm very...
And Ms. Carolyn Lattin, I would turn to you. Is there anything you'd like to say at this time?
We have treated our animals for 15 years. There is no cure for foot scald or rot that I know of. We have talked to WSU, we have talked to Purdue University, we've talked to New Zealand, Australia, I have never heard of any kind of treatment that would be effective to get rid of it as far as a cure is concerned. You can, when they go through the winter and we get 56 inches of rain, the goats are going to suffer with that hoof rot disease, because the only thing we can put on those goats is lime sulfate, and we do that continuously all winter long. But there's no way to get rid of it until it is dry and warm in the summertime, and then they don't have it. And we haven't had that for 4 months already. But there is no reason that we haven't done everything that we could do to get rid of this foot scald, but it has to be the weather has to be dry in order for that medicine to even make a dent in the fungus that is on the feet. You have two choices. You can kill the goat, shoot them, or you can care for them. Well, we happen to be kind and caring people, and so we cared for them. Maybe we should have shot them. That would have saved us a lot of time to doctor them. But you don't shoot somebody who has athlete's foot, and this is kind of the same thing with a fungus. And so I just can't believe that anybody thinks that we've done it for 15 years and we're going to quit a certain time in this winter when we had 56 inches of rain during the month, from October until the end of April. And this was said in the paper, on the front page of the paper, along with the fact that they had picked up our animals. You know, it's pretty sad to think that we would go on and on and on to doctor and then all of a sudden not doctor them anymore. It's ridiculous, but what else?
Anything further, Mr. Cover?
We rest, Your Honor. Thank you.
Well, there's just a couple of things that I want to mention before proceeding to sentencing, and you know, this won't take very long. And I just want to make a comment on some of the things that I heard at the trial and that evidence showed and made an impression on me. And the first is I want to talk about, I found that the video evidence in this case was quite compelling. You know, I agree with you, Ms. Debbie Lattin, this is quite sad. I think both of you said that. It is a sad case. But the video evidence that I found compelling was, I mean, there was two segments of it. There was kind of a before and after. And the video evidence that was taken of these goats when they were taken from the Lattins farm in June was, to me, quite compelling. I'm not a veterinarian, and but you could look at that video, and I think any objective observer could tell that those goats were in a great deal of pain. One of them, or a couple of them, were in such pain that they couldn't even place their foot on the ground. It was like watching a three-legged dog or a three-legged animal walk around because they were in such pain they couldn't even place a foot on the ground. And it was more than just one goat that I observed in that situation. And there was there was some testimony from witnesses who indicated that some of these goats were in such pain that they were walking on their knees, where again they couldn't, their feet were in such pain that they couldn't walk on them. They had to walk on their knees. And when you contrast that video evidence from the video evidence that was produced 4 weeks after these goats were taken, the difference was remarkable. Those goats seemed to be walking, again, I learned a lot about goats, but prior to this trial I didn't know a whole lot about them. But again, to an objective observer who knows nothing about goats, the difference was incredible. Those goats seemed to be walking around, they were happy, they looked happy, as much as goats can look happy to, again, someone like me who doesn't know a whole lot about them. Their tails were wagging and so forth, and it was, the difference was as much as night and day. Some of the expert testimony that occurred on both sides, you know, I do want to disagree with some of the assertion or the implication, I think, raised by Ms. Carolyn Lattin, where is this hoof scald or hoof rot, it was referred to as both phenomena during the course of the trial, as some sort of inevitable result when it rains. And it rains a lot around here. I've lived my whole life in Olympia, and it rains a lot here. We all know this. And I have a tough time, frankly, buying that, given the testimony of experts on both sides. There was the expert from the state who owned goats for several years. They've never experienced that because they know how to deal with it and they know where to store or house and their goats. Again, I remember The testimony coming from the defense witness, Mr. Nelson, I recall, indicated that yes, that happens, and I think his quote was, that kind of resonated with me, is all you got to do is treat it, and it goes away. And I think that's consistent with testimony from both sides, that this is a treatable situation, and you treat it by both applying certain medications to the hooves of the goats, as well as adjusting their living conditions, what they stand in, where they walk around. And that's, based on the testimony, I think that can be fairly easily done. And so, and the other thing, with regard to, going back to the state's request to have these goats forfeited and make the findings as a state's request, the testimony at the trial also was based on letters and records that were taken from the Lattins farm. This is not a new phenomenon. This has been going back for a couple of years even, where during the wintertime, these goats would be in pretty tough shape, experiencing pain as a result of their living conditions. And it wasn't just the state that raised these things. There was some testimony of customers who were, as far as I can tell, fairly random consumers of the Lattins farm. They would show up, they would make observations and look at these goats and make reports and so forth. And so it strikes me that this is an instance that's been going on for a long period of time. It is terribly unfortunate that it had to come to this. And I hear both parties, both the states saying, hey, we wanted to settle this thing. We wanted to come to a situation where the Lattins could keep their goats, maintain their business and so forth. They just wanted to make sure the goats are safe. Mr. Cover, on behalf of the Lattins, said, well, we wanted to too, but they wanted too much money. But, and if that really what it came down to in terms of preventing a solution or resolution to this case that everybody could walk away from, that's really, really unfortunate. Because, from the testimony that I got from Animal Rescue, she indicated it's a nonprofit organization. And, well, I guess we can have differing opinions on that. And, but at the same time, they're going to be, they're entitled to reimbursement for expenses that incurred. But again, I'm going to go back to that video, and just in terms of the observation of the conditions of those goats, and again, it was to me quite compelling. And so the sentence in this case is going to be as follows for both defendants, Ms. Carolyn and Debbie Lattin. The sentences will be identical. All jail time will be suspended, of course. That wouldn't serve any purpose. With regard to costs, it'll be $43 in court costs, a conviction fee in both cases. That's mandatory. I'll impose a civil fine in the amount which is also indicated, which is mandatory. I'll impose a $1,000 civil fine in each case. With regard to their ability to own, care for, or reside with similar animals, the statutory provision will be included in the judgment and sentence, that they're to comply with all aspects of RCW 1652-200, Section 4. And again, that's going to be the judgment and sentence mainly as a reminder, because I think the conviction just serves as, it's a collateral consequence that they can't do that. And so I couldn't waive that even if I wanted to. And I think at some hearing well before trial, I indicated that was, that would be a result if this case were to go to trial and there was a conviction. The trial indicated, again, that there was, based on the records that were taken from the Lattins, that this has been an ongoing issue for years. This is combined with the fact of there were some complaints from some customers. people observe just at the farm as consumers. I'm going to order, based on all of that, that the goats that were taken back in June be forfeited. And I'll make the finding that the evidence supports that that was ongoing for a period of time. And frankly, given the attitude of what went on out there, I don't see any hope for any change. And so I'll make those appropriate findings as well. And I think that just about covers it. Go ahead, Mr. Lippert.
Sorry, there were a couple of other aspects. One was restitution.
Oh, yeah, and then I reviewed the restitution request, and based on the length of the case, the time that went on, and this, it would appear that it's simply covering expenses. There's no boarding fee, which the state could have asked for if they wished to. They didn't. I'm going to order the restitution, and again, it's an unrebutted submission. I'm going to order the restitution in the amount requested. With regard to the, I think there was another request with regard to quarterly inspections. You know, I'm not too sure about that, Mr. Lippert. I mean, let's say, for example, if someone is convicted of, again, I kind of look at this with regard to this provision about not owning or goats. When sometimes people are convicted of certain offenses, they lose certain rights. For example, if someone's convicted of certain misdemeanor domestic violence offenses, they lose the right to own a firearm. Well, they're advised of that, but at the same time, we don't allow the sheriff to go search their home every quarterly to make sure that they're not owning firearms. So I'm a little bit reluctant to, they're under the provision not to own goats, and to have them subject to inspection. I'll have you address that.
Sure.
Whether
This is, first of all, it's part of probation. The Lattins are subject to the jurisdiction of the court during that period of time for 2 years. This is akin to, and I'm not equating the two offenses, but this is akin to a probationary requirement on someone who is convicted of a drug offense to go to submit to mandatory UAs on a periodic basis. That is a search, that is a seizure, it is guided by the Fourth Amendment. And under the court's jurisdiction, that is a routine imposition on a convicted defendant in that kind of case. This, what I'm asking for, what the state is asking for here, is a reasonable provision to ensure that the Lattins comply with the orders of the court. There is evidence in this case that it's a reasonable provision to allow the Thurston County Sheriff's Office, who the agency that is charged with investigating and protecting the animals in our community, to go into the Lattins, look at their outbuildings and their farm to ensure that there is compliance. Otherwise, Your Honor, there is no way for the state to determine that there is compliance. They would have to rely on the what happened before, which was customers coming in and reporting or reporting out that they saw a goat or a sheep or whatever. We also want to address the type of animals involved here as well, Your Honor. The state would have to rely on that for compliance. There is a civil penalty involved with failure to comply. Not a criminal penalty, a civil penalty. But there should be law enforcement or some sort of government agency oversight on this provision. It's a 2-year period of time, and the Lattins farm, while it's open to the public, is otherwise, if this provision is put in there, the sheriff's department would have to, investigators or the enforcement agencies would have to be forced to obtain a search warrant to make sure that they were complying with this. The animals that are included here, goats, sheep, pigs, which I've asked for, which the state has asked for, these animals are kept other places than are in view of the public. That's what we'd have to rely on, is the public, if you don't add an enforcement mechanism to this. A quarterly unannounced inspection no more than quarterly, I'm talking once every 3 months for 2 years, that the sheriff's office has would be authorized to go out to the Lattins farm, take a look around and ensure that they're complying with the rules or with the prohibitions placed on them by statute. I don't think that's unreasonable. I think the state would submit to your honor that it's no different than other compliance measures put on people who have probation for other types of offenses. So it's an important aspect of the state's request here. The other aspect of it, your honor, is the type of animals involved. You didn't delineate them. The state asked for specifically for a definition of similar animals. The Lattins are a business. The Latin cider mill and farm is a business. These animals were used primarily as an attraction, and while the state is not in any way trying to hamper their business, we are trying to ensure that they comply with the statutory prohibition. If they would have taken care of their animals, we would have settled this out of court, we wouldn't be having this discussion. But that's not what happened here. The Lattins have now been convicted, and a certain prohibition by statute is now enforced. The state would ask that that be delineated so that these business people, with the help of their attorneys, don't thwart the intention of the statute or the court or the jury when they were sentenced for this crime. And finally, your honor, under the statute, the Lattins are no longer allowed to own, care for, or reside with any similar animals. I don't know what the Lattins have done. They're in between now, since the time of this trial, but the goat herd that was left there totaled 31, and 18 of them were seized, which you've ordered to be forfeited. That left 13 goats on the farm, plus other animals that are included in the type that are other similar animals on the farm. And those animals, there needs to be a time frame set up for the Lattins to divest themselves of those animals so that they are no longer owning or caring for those animals. The state would ask by January 15th that be accomplished. There is not going to be, the statute doesn't envision, nor does the state want to go in and seize the other animals. However, there needs to be something in your order, your honor, respectfully, that gives them a time frame for which to divest themselves of their animals. I believe that was probably my fault that I didn't ask for it earlier, but it is something that needs to be requested at this point. So that's all.
Mr. Cooper?
Thank you, Your Honor. We share your caution about the quarterly inspections. The vast jurisprudence that exists for drug cases and for your analyses does not exist when it comes to inspections of the animals. And I would remind the court that it was the reports of consumers that wound up bringing this matter to the fore in the first place. Not to mention the fact that Thurston County District Court puts people on bench probation all the time. And bench probation would be appropriate here, Your Honor. If there really is, some sort of effort to thwart the compliance, as my colleague puts it, then I have every faith that the public will be reporting that in the court. Now, as far as the animal statute, Mr. Lippert spoke to I believe it's the genus Artiodactyla. My understanding of the case law is that that would fit perfectly with the statute here, because Artiodactyla is the two-toed ungulates in which goats and sheep and other like animals, as described in the statute, they do belong to that. However, the statute doesn't, it doesn't entertain the fact that we will just throw in all of these other animals. That would be an attempt to thwart my client's business, Your Honor. And so, again, I would ask you to trust your instinct to do away with the quarterly inspection requirement, allow this to be handled by way of bench probation, and that Artiodactyla be the taxonomic nomenclature used to make a finding of which animals would be prohibited from being owned, residing with, or cared for by the Lattins. Thank you, Your Honor.
Give me a couple of minutes here. What type of animal is that again, Mr. Cover?
The genus is Artiodactyla.
That's just the order, are you?
Thank you.
And does that, what does that include? Does that include all the animals that were identified by Mr. Lippert, or no?
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
This is not Mark Hannon beyond.
Mr. Covey?
Sorry, my fault.
All of us are here to support her.
I know this, ma'am.
Well, and now that she's gone
Hang on,
through all this,
Just hang on a
we're
second,
here
but
to support her. Yeah.
I'm just gonna say, I know that. I'm gonna let Mr. Cover talk. If Mr. Cover wants a minute to speak with you, I'll give it to him. Mr. Cover, you should, Mr. Cover. Thank you. Anything further, Mr. Cover?
Not until after the sentence is handed down, I believe, Your Honor.
Thank you. Okay, just a minute, I'm gonna prepare some orders up here, and then, put on the record everything I do in just a minute, so take a minute.
One point, if I may, before you finish preparing the order, ask that that any action on that order be stayed for 30 days pending a notice of appeal.
Thank you.
That's right. Superior Court. She was at the Bishop. So she's sitting here watching the case. This is the fact 2018 when they came in. Gotcha, that makes sense. So they all knew what this is.
because the computer won't let me fit all the conditions on electronic orders under the page order, so, I'll summarize everything in a moment.
It's pretty simple. The goats were hanging out there. What a joke. It's so crazy. Until you witness what's going on here, see what's going on in the courtroom and see what the way they do it, you never believe it. Happen every day. Yeah, I know. I mean, the only common thing people get pulled into court for usually is traffic violations, but nothing usually real criminal. Looking at serious jail time. We're never gonna witness
His brother, who we haven't seen 17 years, get married now, so it's really neat. It's for North Face. It's that it's tight, but it's, I could even breathe. So I'm hoping I can find a larger well and change it. It feels great, but I can't breathe.
I say anything in more lenient. What he was gonna set me for.
Since I'm able to, it's going to have a half cast on it.
We're just trying to like talk to them around leniency and
Or else
I'll make that look sure.
Somebody told Nick as well. I only remember what you wanted to do.
Again,
So we got a pipe that has one smoked up by the bed. I think I borrowed scotch. Nick doesn't like it. Of course, he was very gracious. I don't think he was very
their system. Their system. They want some protection and what to do.
Okay, so we'll go back on the record now, and then I have written orders prepared in both cases. As I've indicated before, on both cases, all jail time will be suspended, $43 in court costs. Those will be separate. $43 will be a court cost or conviction fee will enter in each case against each defendant. $1,000 fine, civil fine will be entered in each case against each defendant. With regard to restitution, I'm going to jump down to that. The restitution, it's going to be $6,768 in 26 That'll be written on the judgment and sentence in each case, but it's not each one of them. That'll be joint and several with the other. And so if it's the total restitution amount is $67.68, they don't both need to pay that. With regard to the other conditions of the sentence, they're not to have any criminal law violations. And as I indicated before, the forfeit sees goats pursuant to RCW 1652-200, Section 3, with the appropriate findings. And then with regard to, I am going to allow quarterly inspections of the property to ensure compliance, and they're not to own, either party is to own, care for, or reside with any, if I pronounce this correctly, Artiodactyla, and I didn't line them out, but any member of that order, of those, of that particular order, they're not to own, care for, or reside with any of those animals. And I guess the last thing I'm going to say is, before we go off the record and I'm going to leave, and I know this has been an emotional case and there's a lot of people here in support of the Lattins, I know that. There's a lot of people here also who I think could be fairly characterized as being with animal rights groups, and so I think there's that as well. And so, and I guess I just want to go back to the trial, some of the things I heard at trial, and just something that I've thought about, and I don't know whether other judges will think about this or not. Again, that video evidence, there was evidence presented at this trial where, you know, goats simply could not put their weight on feet. They were in such pain. That's just the way it was. And this defense's own expert indicated that on the lameness scale, that he observed 3 out of 5, which I guess 3 out of 5, I guess that could be characterized as moderate amount of lameness, where frankly there shouldn't have been any. And there didn't need to be any, based on the evidence that I heard in terms of how you care for goats and all of that. And so I think that's my sentence, and Mr. Colbert, you come forward, you have them sign off on these, and then they can keep the bottom 2 copies, one for you and one for yourself. And that will conclude today's hearing.
Please rise.
Total of $8,800 for both of them.
Okay.
So $1,000 fine, that's got $6,700 between both of them. $44 each for court costs. $109,000 total for both of them. And $9,000 penalty for both of them together. For $2,500 for judges. And $50,000 for Horvath.